lot of boomers and Xers save their asks pretty well, right? But you look at these younger groups, and I'm on the other side of Askholes all day, every day. Look at any of our inboxes or LinkedIn, or the automated ask, right? When someone connects with you on LinkedIn and then nanoseconds later, they're like, hey, can I sell my technology or set up? I'm like, no, I'm not setting up on your Calendly some meeting.
Welcome to the Beyond Speaking podcast from Premier Speakers Bureau, featuring in-depth conversations with the world's most in-demand keynote speakers.
Hi, I'm Brian Lord. Welcome to the Beyond Speaking podcast. We have with us today Chris Tuff. Chris Tuff is the best-selling author of the Millennial Whisperer. He's spoken for Harvard, Verizon, Home Depot, lots of other places. He's an avid workout freak. He was just telling me about this. So excited to have him on today. Thank you for joining us.
Dude, it's so awesome to be back in Nashville. Let's do this. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things that you cover that are really impressive, really neat today. Talking about recruiting, retention, culture, kind of the future of work, a lot of those things. But first I want you to just kind of tell us how you got from where you were, Vanderbilt guy, to here now.
Yeah. So I am somewhat embarrassed when I tell people I graduated from Vanderbilt, huge confidence and ego, had 68 job interviews, and it was luckily the next one that I took that I ended up interviewing for this internet job and internet advertising. We were a small firm, and we ended up going from 13 employees to like 400. And in that process, I kept making lateral moves. I was an account executive, and then I was like, I was the worst creative copywriter in advertising history. And then I fell into this thing that was a little bit creative, but then also a little bit media, and it was as social media was really coming about, and had the opportunity to work with Zuckerberg and his team in the early days as he expanded into the general public from schools, and then the rest was kind of history. And what really attracted me to that space was Zuckerberg's main purpose to make the world a more connected place. And I've always been obsessed with this human connection thing. And what's interesting, it took me really hitting rock bottom in 2016 that I realized I'm living a life of disconnection in both what I'm building, but I looked at my connection with my wife and my children as I was hobnobbing, playing the status game, going all around the world. I looked at my connection with my team of 400 employees. I was really just on planes the whole time. And then I looked at my connection with just those around me. I was like, I'm actually gonna double down in all of those. And it was after doubling down on my team, it was 7 months later, after I kind of rebuilt this house from the ground up, I introduced myself around the fire on an executive retreat, and I was like, hey guys, I'm Chris Tuff. I don't really know what I do anymore, but I'm kind of like the Millennial Whisperer. And then it was after that, a lot of these guys were like, man, like the stuff you're doing with your team, you gotta write that book. So I wrote it. And then I'd like to say the rest is history, but it's been a lot of pushing and really staying focused in this purpose of bringing more authentic connection to the world, both within our teams, but also with how we go about networking and selling.
I'm sure a lot of leaders need to refocus and redo that. What's kind of the first step that you give most people, most leaders, when it comes to reconnecting with their team? So first you got to look at where the problems lie. And one of the things that I learned in the actually social media and technology space was this idea of be a painkiller, not a vitamin. And so when I go into organizations, I look at their pain points first. And the places that people are having the greatest pain points right now are around hiring and recruiting talent, and then retention, keeping talent. Mm-hmm. And until I look at their own data, I can't really tell you which of my tactics are best. But there are essentially two levers that we can utilize. One is the organizational lever. That's embracing a larger interpretation of what work flexibility looks like, and then it's pay and benefits, right? Mm-hmm. And the other one is leadership. And the three main characteristics that we need to prioritize are inspirational leadership, autonomy, and transparency. The unfortunate thing is a lot of times those things are misinterpreted
But even if you went to Bob, who has, let's just say 20 people under him, you're like, Bob, inspirational leadership's the most important thing for millennials and Gen Zers. Bob, would you consider yourself inspirational? Bob's like, hell yeah, like my team, they laugh at my jokes. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, thanks, Bob. And then you go to 2 people on Bob's team and you're like, hey, listen, we hear inspirational leadership's super important to you. Is Bob an inspirational leader? Their first question is Bob going to find out if I tell you the truth? And it's like, no, he's not going to find out.
Yeah.
And they're like, heck no, he laughs at his own jokes. And it's funny, one of the things I talk about is the biggest issue with inspirational leadership is LAE. And LAE is low ass energy.
Yeah.
And what we need to be bringing more of is this HAE. And so a lot of my stuff really kind of combines both of those things, but also further defining using stories, but then grounding it in tactics and that company's own data to really be that painkiller.
Mm-hmm. How do you, and one of the amazing things you do is prior to a speech, like a month or farther out, you're able to actually do surveys or do some research. Tell us how that takes place.
Sure. So one of the things I realized in working with these very different organizations is that there's a few places that as soon as I leave the stage, that regardless of what happens, they can have a massive impact on their ability to keep talent, but also recruit talent. But unless you look at the data, there's no way of uncovering what exactly that is. And there's also stuff that a lot of organizations are doing really well. So before about 6 weeks or a month before I go in for a speech, I've created my own piece of software using 92 data points, but it's only 7 questions. It's super simple to fill out. It's got after you fill it out, it's a meme of the office space guys giving high fives, but it's also asking the right questions. So then I can be more prescriptive about that keynote that I'm delivering. Mm-hmm. And so that to me has been a huge game changer in terms of my ability to once again figure out where are those pain points. And you look at culture. Culture's thrown around so often nowadays. And culture comes from your people, right? Culture is not your values. It's up to leadership to help direct it, but culture really comes from your team. And even when I interpret autonomy was best shown to me really through this idea of, I interviewed a guy, Ben Kirshner. Forbes called him the #1 boss for millennials and Gen Zers as I was writing the book. And he goes, so Chris, let's talk about autonomy. And we started talking about it. And he goes, have you ever seen the Under Armour commercial, Protect This House? I'm like, kind of, tell me more.
Yeah.
He goes, well, it's like this rah-rah of the team getting together and protecting this house. So the first thing you got to ask yourself, that if you were to turn over that autonomy to your team, do you have a house worth protecting? Meaning, do you have a culture problem? That when unlimited paid vacation or even a bad culture fit, when you put it on your team to protect this house, are they willing to do it? And if you have a culture problem, you don't have a house worth protecting, and it's clean up on aisle culture. Mm-hmm. And I've got a lot of tactics for that. But if you do have a house worth protecting, go ahead and let your teams lead that way and relinquish the control because everyone's craving it.
When it comes to culture, what are some companies doing really well that may surprise people, and maybe some areas where it's a little bit lower?
Yeah, one thing with culture is you can have the best culture in the world, and it's largely the ones that you've never heard of that have the best cultures. Mm-hmm. So it's funny because as I've interviewed and met so many people, it's like the company that makes the screws that fit into the back of the TV that actually have the best culture. It's the ones that you think would have the most amazing culture that are super famous and world renowned, and those are the ones that don't have necessarily the best culture. So culture is having a team that wants to have beer together or hang out together. It's not necessarily bringing beer kegs or ping pong tables in. And to just get people to wrap their head around that is super important. A lot of people will have culture problems and then they throw money at salaries or a new office building. And it's like, you don't need any of that stuff. What you need is connection. And one of the big changes that happened as you look at mid-millennials, 36 all the way down to 24-year-olds, Gen Zers, is that they have an expectation that their boss is going to be a lot like their parental kind of relationship. You look at how Xers and boomers were raised. When we sat at the dinner table, it was, for me, my dad was British. Christopher, how are your grades? Where you think about going to school? Vanderbilt's not good enough, right? Like, it's like all this stuff. Whereas you look at mid-millennials and Gen Zers, they're not even sitting at the dinner table. They're playing beer pong out back, ripping on a Juul, talking about who they just hooked up with last weekend, right? It's such more of this camaraderie and less of this authoritarian thing that a lot of things that leaders fail to recognize is, I'm not saying we have to be friends with all of our employees, but we've got to have that vested interest in their personal lives as well as what they're doing professionally, and create more of that authentic connection in our day-to-day or weekly basis. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And once again, if you look at some of the tactics, what's in our arsenal to help drive culture, rewards and recognition is one of those things that is so easy that a lot of people aren't doing near enough of. And I'm not saying we overly reward and recognize our people, but our top-down and peer-to-peer reward systems need to be in place. And my favorite example of the top-down reward system is actually a company out of San Francisco, very sales-oriented. And what happens there is on your first day, you fill out all your HR paperwork, and then they will ask you, what do you want your at-bat song to be? What do you want to play over the loudspeakers if you're going up for a speech or to get the award? And you're kind of like, that's kind of weird. All I do is win, right? Or whatever it is. We are the champions. And then you kind of forget about it. And then on the first day of every month, they take the number one salesperson and they play that person's at-bat song. So all I do is win is going over the loudspeakers. Blue sirens go off and they take a 10-foot big blue rooster on wheels to sit next to that person's cubicle for the month. Do you know how many cash bonuses they give away? 0. They give away a big blue rooster. So I tell organizations, what's your big blue rooster? What's that thing you're doing on at least a monthly or maybe quarterly, ideally monthly basis to reward your people? And then the second piece is establishing a peer-to-peer system. And so there's lots of things that we have our ability to do, but we throw money at the wrong solutions. And that's what I try to come in and inspire.
What would your walk-up song be?
So it's funny because it was Jack Johnson. So I'm trying to set him up, right?
Banana pancakes?
No, it's not banana. Better together. But like Jack Johnson was doing it. And then there's this new, I was actually playing it on my way in here to get all fired up for this interview. But it's a reggae band called The Movement. And it's called Always With Me. And it's just very upbeat. And it sets a vibe of kind of what I'm trying to do, which is let's stop trying to make things so serious and let's double down on like this comfort of this, right? And I think so often we end up getting caught up in all this other stuff that we forget the most important thing for all of us is to feel loved, recognized, and appreciated for what it is that we're doing, and ideally making some form of an impact that's larger than just ourselves. And what I run up against the most is the mentality, well, I had to do it this way. Why don't they? And I'm trying to meet in the middle on all that stuff.
Yeah. So, what is your newest book, your newest speech? Yeah. Because you're talking a lot about sales, and then you get a lot of requests for sales. So, what's kind of that new presentation that you're bringing up?
So, let me put you the two most important traits I'm trying to instill in my 13 and 11-year-old daughters are tenacity and resilience. And my resilience muscle has been built, just like I'm trying to build them in my daughters. And I have my 2-hour rule, which is when you get something that doesn't go your way, you have 2 hours to wallow in it, and then it's time to bounce back. So the pandemic hits. I'm getting all of these big speeches for the Millennial Whisperer and culture, and I get a call from, I was supposed to do a keynote for all of the sales teams at Nike, and it was the president, Heidi O'Neill's assistant, that called me and said, Mr. Tuff, we don't know what's happening, this pandemic's hitting, this isn't gonna work. And I'm like, crap, what am I gonna do now? And I'm like, okay, 2-hour rule, Chris. Like what, who knows how long this is gonna last? That stinks that I'm not gonna be on the main stage at Nike. And then I'm like, wait, what is the book that I was really born to write? And I thought about it. I'm like, what does everyone come to me for advice around? It's like, how do you have such a crazy network? And then I was like, wait, I did a guest lecture at Vanderbilt for the senior class. It was the highest rated guest lecture of the year. And it was titled, How to Network Like a Mofo. I'm like, wait a second, I'm gonna write that book and I'm gonna use this opportunity to interview all of these untouchables. Who knows how long this is gonna last? And I'm gonna make it a call to action to encourage people to go in with authentic connection, but really to save our asks. And I look at your inbox. Look at any of our LinkedIn. So many people are going in for asks way too early. We're surrounded by Askholes. What if we just flip that mentality a little bit, right? Where desired outcome of anything was just authentic connection. We'd actually be a lot better networkers and probably more effective in our sales jobs. And so I wrote the Millennial Whisperer in 4.5 months. I wrote Save Your Asks over 2.5 years because I was having so much fun interviewing everyone from pro surfers to, these flooring guys that are salespeople that ended up creating this monster company. And, it was just such an amazing experience to learn from the best. And then obviously published it. And as we're now coming back into the world, it kind of goes back to my earlier work, is that the younger you get with your sales team, the less of that interpersonal muscle they have, because so much of their upbringing has been done on digital devices. So they need to be retaught. A lot of boomers and Xers save their asks pretty well, right? But you look at these younger groups, and I'm on the other side of Askholes all day, every day. Look at any of our inboxes or LinkedIn, or the automated ask, right? When someone connects with you on LinkedIn and then nanoseconds later, they're like, hey, can I sell my technology or set up? I'm like, no, I'm not setting up on your Calendly some meeting. I'm like, wow, I think I could have a really big impact here. But more than anything, inspire more of this authentic connection on a day-to-day basis. And so that's essentially what I'm doing.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, all these great tips for retention and culture, retaining great talent and making an impact and networking. So thank you, Chris, for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you for joining us for the Beyond Speaking podcast. To learn more about today's guest, go to premierspeakers.com. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen.